You just let me know when you go live. Okay. Welcome everybody tonight to our middle of the week Wednesday night Bible study fellowship time, and thank you so much for those of you who are watching online and joining us online. Hopefully you can find us. I know we're about 10 minutes later than normal starting, so maybe you'll find us in a few minutes. Nonetheless, we're going to finish up on 1 Peter tonight, and then next week we'll move into 2 Peter for a couple of weeks until we finish this study. But hopefully it's been something that's been a help to you, something that has been, maybe you've learned something or at least been encouraged by what you've learned or what you've studied, and hopefully tonight will be just that as well. 1 Peter chapter 4, we've been talking about, Peter's been talking about standing firm throughout times of persecution, opposition, and so we've talked about, we'll kind of get into this as we do our, let's see if this thing's going to work now. Yeah, I think so. I think it's right. Let's try it here. Maybe it'll like this side better. Nope, not doing anything, not changing. That's okay? Huh? Yep. Just switch it for me. There you go. You can do that. We'll just move ahead. We're having all kinds of little technical difficulties tonight, but it's okay. Battery's probably dead in that. All right, so we're going to, first thing tonight is we'll do a little review, kind of where we were. We started off, Peter was talking about our situation, the circumstances of those who would identify themselves with Jesus Christ. They would experience persecution. There would be these times of trial. There would be these times of testing. But we were, he encouraged the believers, and he's encouraging us to stand firm because it's just a test and it will be temporary, that they're going to eventually go ahead. And then we moved into the transition. Remember, he said, therefore, and started talking about conduct. So moved from our standing and the circumstances into our conduct. How are we to live in the light of all of that, in the light of knowing all of what happened in chapter 1, what he talked to us about in chapter 1. He started talking to us about chapter 2 was moving into our conduct. And that's kind of where we are, where we studied the second week. And then last week, he started talking about the concept of submission and what it was like to live, to practice this spirit of submission in different relationships in our lives. We talked about a relationship to authority, a relationship to in the workplace, relationship at home, and then relationship at the church. And ultimately, the kind of theme through all of that was we are to be submitted to God, because unless there's submission to God, then we're going to struggle with submission to all these other areas in our life. And so we kind of went into that last week, the idea of submission. So this week we have another therefore. Okay, if you notice chapter 4, and I don't know, are you waiting on me? Okay, yeah, I done went through all those review. I've kind of zipped through them. Okay, so now we're go ahead, keep going. One more. There we go. So this week we're right here at another transition. Notice chapter 4, the first word is therefore. Peter likes this transition. He likes using this one to kind of let us know, hey, we're moving to another thought. And so in chapter 4, 1 Peter is where we're going to be. We're going to read down through verses 1 through 6, and we're going to skip down through verse 12 and then read to the end of the chapter, okay? But really, he's transitioning from talking about our conduct, our circumstances, and this idea of submission to actual suffering. He kind of spins suffering in a good light. He's saying this is good. Suffering is a good thing, and so I want us to read it, and then we'll kind of dive into it together, make some application and observations together. All right, beginning in verse 1, chapter 4, verse 1. Therefore, since Christ suffered for us in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same mind. For he who has also suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, that he no longer should live the rest of his time in the flesh for the lust of men, but for the will of God. For we have spent enough of our past lifetime in doing the will of the Gentiles, when we walked in lewdness and in drunkenness and revelries and drinking parties and abominable idolatries. In regard to these, they think it strange that you do not run with them in the same flood of dissipation, speaking evil of you. They will give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this reason, the gospel was preached also to those who are dead, that they might be judged according to the men in the flesh, but live according to God in the Spirit. Now skip down to verse 12. Behold, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you. But rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. If you are reproached for the name of Christ, blessed are you, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. On their part he is blasphemed, but on your part he is glorified. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, a thief, an evildoer, or as a busybody in other people's matters. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in this matter. For the time has come for judgment to begin at the house of God, and if it begins with us first, what will be the end of those who do not obey the gospel of God? Now, if the righteous one is scarcely saved, where will the ungodly and the sinner appear? Therefore, let those who suffer according to the will of God commit their soul to him in doing good as to a faithful Creator. All right? So, how or what is, and we can go to the next slide, what is good about suffering? That would be my question, to Peter. He's talking about suffering. If somebody were to just say to you, hey, it's good to suffer. My question would be, well, what's good about suffering? Okay? I don't like to suffer. I don't like to hurt. I don't like to be in pain. I don't like to, struggle. I would like it if every day was like 72 or 71 degrees outside and my car started all the time. Went the other morning, I was going to go hunting, and I got up, real early in the morning and all ready to go, all prepared to go, and get the truck all loaded and get out there, open my car door of my truck and get in there and nothing. Just nothing. It won't start. Dead battery. Like, what is this? And my first temptation was, well, I'm just going to pack it in, go back to bed, right? Because it's real early. But then I thought, no, I'm not. I'm going to jump start this truck and get on to where I was going. And I did. Jump start. And guess what? It hadn't stopped since. So I don't know, I did check that it was charging. So, but I would like it if there was never any days like that where you turn the key and nothing, it always cranks. There's always air in the tires. Your computer always works and connects to stuff. And little gadgets always click and everything works. I don't like stuff not to work right. I want it all to work good. I don't like things that don't happen according to plan. I don't like to suffer. But Peter is making it clear that suffering, in a sense, is a good thing. And so what kind of suffering is he talking about? And we're going to learn that tonight as we go through these verses. Obviously, we just read them, but we're going to kind of go through them and make some applications. So let's look at the first thing we can see as he begins this kind of lesson here in chapter 4, is he's basically making the kind of selling the case. Suffering is good because it confirms that we're growing spiritually, we're progressing spiritually, that there is a spiritual growth going on, that you are becoming more like Christ. He talks about those who had suffered in the flesh had ceased from sin. that they no longer should live the rest of his time in the flesh for the lust of men, but for the will of God. So this idea is that when you become a follower of Jesus Christ, there's a change that takes place in you. And that change that takes place, if you are suffering for Jesus, then you know you're doing something right. Because friends, if you're a Christian and you never have any problems, never have any challenges, never have any difficulties, perhaps you may better check your faith, okay? Because if you've not noticed, this world in which we live in is not going the same way you're going, okay? This world in which we're living in is not the same world. Go to the next slide there, brother. As Christians, we're expected to be different. We're expected to change. There should be a turning away from our sinful ways. So when we turn away from our sinful ways, then we're not walking by the way we used to walk. We're not going the way we used to go. There's obviously going to be some opposition. There's obviously going to be some struggles. There's obviously going to be some backlash, whether it comes from friends or whether it comes from coworkers or whether it comes from family. You're going to face some type of opposition. Peter talks about here that he spent enough of his time in the life in his past living the way of the Gentiles. In other words, going the way of his own, the way of the world. He said, I've spent enough of my life doing that. From now on, I want to walk the way of the Spirit. I want to go the way of the will of God. I want to do the things of the will of God. So when we're doing that, we're going to experience persecution. But then you look at it from an opposite form. You could say, hey, if I'm experiencing persecution, then that must mean I'm turning from sin, and that must mean that I'm walking in the will of God. See? You see what I'm saying? So it kind of confirms to you you're doing something right. If you're experiencing this, then perhaps you're doing something right. So that's the first truth he points out there in verses 1 through 3, that there should be this turning away from sin. There should be this walking according to the Spirit, the will of God. And if you're doing that, then you're going to experience this opposition. And if you're seeing that opposition, then you can say it confirms that you are doing the right thing. Let's go to the next truth that he makes, which demonstrates a good testimony, which I like this one even more so. And it's in verses 4 through 6. He talks about those who would look at you and judge you because you no longer are doing the same things you used to do. How many of you, now see, I became a Christian as a teenage boy, so I didn't have a lot of friends, even though I did have some friends, and I remember some of those friends kind of, talking to me and looking at me strange, like that. But I think it more so happens when you come to faith as an adult. Anybody in here come to faith as an adult? Anybody in here? Most all of us probably came to faith as a young child or earlier in our maturity level growing up. Well, if you know what I'm talking about, if you come to faith as an adult, and maybe somebody will be watching who's come to faith as an adult, you'll know that when people knew you before Christ, they knew how you used to live before Christ, and then they see you after you make this confession of faith in Jesus, they come to and they'll say, why did you do that? They'll wonder what's going on with you. They want to know what's happening with you. And that's kind of what Peter was talking about. He said, you're no longer walking the way you used to walk, right? He made that point in verses 1 through 3. But he says now you should be going against the flow, so to speak. Go to the next slide, brother. Notice he says here in verse 4, in regard to these that think it's strange that you do not run with them in the same flood of dissipation, speaking evil of you. In other words, people say, why don't you come to parties with us? Why don't you come here? Why don't you do this? Why don't you go here with us? Why don't you do that kind of stuff? Well, because you're a follower of Jesus. You're a Christian. You don't do those kind of things. You used to walk that way, but now you changed. You're walking in a different way. That's a confirmation to you. When people start speaking evil of you, it's a confirmation that you're doing the right thing, but it also shows you that you have a good testimony because you're living before them someone who's a faith that is genuine and real. That you're not somebody who just puts on a show on Sundays, right? Somebody who dresses up with some kind of religious garb, comes to church on a Sunday, goes through the motion, and then Monday through Saturday just does whatever everybody else is doing, right? You're not going with the flood. You're not following the same flood that's going in the direction, but as Christians, we're going opposite direction. How many of you watched the series The Chosen? Anybody in here watch The Chosen? You've seen The Chosen? So in The Chosen, you'll notice the intro of The Chosen. Don't you see all the fish? And they're all swimming one way, and the fish are swimming, and then all of a sudden one fish will turn around, and there'll be one fish swimming this way, and all the fish are swimming this way, and the next thing you know, another fish will turn around and go back that way, and there'll be two fish swimming that way. And then next thing you know, it's three more fish swimming that way. And all these, before you long, you got a bunch of fish swimming the opposite direction of all the fish. And the idea is that, here's the way of the world. It's all going this way. Well, when you become a follower of Jesus, you're turning around, and now you're swimming against the flood. And as you're going this way, folks, you can guarantee you're going to have opposition. If you're not rubbing shoulders with somebody or having that kind of oppositions every now and then with someone, then you might want to make sure you're going the right way, right? That's kind of what he said in verses 1 through 3. But in verses 4 through 6, he says, listen, but as you're going that way, people are going to take notice. Hey, why is he swimming that way? Why are you living that way? Some people might speak evil of you. Some people might, talk bad about you, especially the people that you used to run with, right? Those people you used to run with. They might talk bad about you, but it's a good testimony nonetheless. He also talks about people judging you. He said that they'll be judged. When these people speak evil of you, they'll have to give an account to Jesus. So we don't need to get all angry if somebody, talks bad about us or gives us a hard time because we don't want to run to the bars with them, or we don't want to go out clubbing with them, or we don't want to go, hang out and do stuff like that, or whatever else, it might be that they want, that we used to do, they want us to do. We don't need to get angry about it. We need to say, hey, this is a good testimony. I can show them, hey, my life is different now. I'm living for the Lord now, and I'm going to do things differently. And leave them, however they're going to treat you, whatever they're going to say about you, leave it in the hands of the Lord, because the Lord is going to judge them just like He'll judge you. And He's going to take care of you. He goes on to say in verse, I think it's verse 6, and that they might be judged according to men in the flesh, but live according to God in the Spirit. So we ought to realize that we're going to be judged by God, so will they be judged by God, but we're also going to be judged by men, and it's going to happen. But isn't that what we should want? Isn't that what we should want in this life? As we live for Christ, shouldn't we want people to look at us and make judgments about us? If they can't see Christ in us and make that judgment with their mind and saying, listen, this guy is real. I see they take a stand. They might not jump and want to sign up and become a Christian tomorrow just because you're not doing the same things you used to do, or because you won't do the same thing, you won't go off there and do the things they want you to do. They might not, come to faith that way, but they're going to see something different in you, and that's a good testimony. So suffering is actually a good testimony, and it will help us have that good testimony. Let's go to the next truth, which is beginning in verse 12, which is it promotes Christ-likeness. This is where Peter starts to make the case that this idea of suffering is something we should realize that we should want to suffer like Christ, because Christ suffered for us. He talks about making it, not considering it a strange thing. Next slide, if you wouldn't mind. So we should learn to expect it. If you're going to suffer for Christ, now I'm not talking about suffering for wrong, which we're going to get into that in just a few minutes. I'm talking about you're doing right, you're trying to do the right things, and hardships are coming your way, difficulties are coming your way, challenges are coming your way, opposition, those kind of things. We shouldn't think about that as being strange. We should expect it. We should realize right now, hey, this is going to happen. Matter of fact, again, it's a good thing, right? That means I'm living the right way. My testimony is good because I'm experiencing this kind of persecution, and now I'm becoming more like Christ. That's the goal for every believer. That's the goal for every Christian, that we become more like Jesus each and every day. He talks about rejoicing, that we should rejoice in it. Look, verse 13. Rejoice in the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings. So we should rejoice that we get to be a part of what Christ did. He talks about it being, to be able, may also be glad with exceeding joy. So it's not just that you're, well, I'm going to smile because I get to suffer. No, I'm excited that I get to be able to identify with Jesus, that I get to experience this suffering like Christ did. So I can be like Christ. Now that I'm experiencing suffering, I'm like Christ. It's exactly what Paul talked about whenever he said he bore in his body the scars of his identification with Christ. So the fact is that we should have those. You ever get a scar? You ever have something happen to you? Maybe, I've never had anything happen to me that was really, I got a couple of scars that, to talk about, but they're really, like my biggest scar was just from me being stupid. So, that's not one I really brag about. But if you ever get one of, people that get bit by sharks and stuff, or, wrestle an alligator and get the leg half torn off and they get like a nasty scar on their alligator. And let me show you about this scar here. I got cut by an alligator. Look, this was a shark attack. That's just, that's the most macho thing you can ever do is show off your scars. I'm like, I got burnt on my finger, because I, touched a welding rod or whatever, or, I did this or something. Whatever. Mine just don't sound as cool. But imagine you carry the scars of Christ. Carry the scars of suffering for Jesus, that you'll be able to say, I was faithful, and this is where, I was faithful to stand for Jesus, and this is the scar I have because of it. That's kind of what Paul was saying, and that's what Peter is saying, that we should rejoice in it. Expect it and rejoice that we're becoming more Christ-like. So that's a good thing when we see that we're suffering. That means we're becoming more like Christ. And then notice the last part here, in verses 15 to 19, ultimately glorifies God. The fact is that our lives exist. Number one purpose is to glorify God. And everything we do, whether that means we walk around this earth and just eating and drinking and breathing and existing, all of that's to glorify God. If we're in a relationship with our family and in the home with our spouse and parenting, all that's to glorify God. If we're coming to the church and we're worshiping and we're learning God's Word and we're teaching God's Word, or we're out there, doing that kind of thing in church, fellowshipping, encouraging one another, all that's to glorify God. If we're out there on the street, we're out there helping people, we're out there, trying to help people, feed the hungry and help the homeless and take care of people's needs and meet people's needs of our neighbors and our friends and family. All that's to glorify God. Everything we do is about glorifying God. So why should suffering not be anything? Should it be any different? Suffering is just another way to glorify God. It's just another way of saying, Lord, I want you to get the credit in my life. I want you to get the glory. He starts talking about it here in verses 15 through 19. He said, let none of you suffer as a murderer or thief or evildoer. In other words, a busybody in other people's business. In other words, we shouldn't cause suffering, right? We shouldn't do things to bring about suffering to ourselves, because that's not going to glorify God. If I'm going out there and I'm doing dumb stuff, that's not going to glorify God. So don't go out and cause it, and we don't go looking for it either, right? In other words, I don't want to go say, well, let me go find the baddest part of town and go knock on doors and invite people to Jesus, right?
I don't think He promises to protect us when we're being done.
Right. If the Lord, like years ago, we had a lady who visited our church, and she filled out a visitor card, and I was following up with her, and so I took another young lady with me who was familiar with the area, because I wasn't very familiar with the area, and then we went and visited this lady. And I remember going into this place, and I was walking up to this apartment, and it was kind of like a duplex. It was a fourplex, I guess. 2 apartments here like this, and 2 apartments here with like a breezeway in the middle. You had to kind of go around the thing and go in the middle of it. And when you went down, I felt like I was walking in an alley. between two houses, between these two. And as I'm walking down through there, I'm like, people are like laid out on the, porch, just laid out on the floor, laid out on the ground, and, sleep. And the door, when we finally made it to the place, the door was just wide open. The door was there. I think it had a door, but it was just wide open. Just open it, and I knocked on the door frame and, said who we were, and, who we were coming to visit. And somebody would say, who is it? Asked me who it was, and I saw a figure in the darkness, kind of in the shadows in there. And, finally, the lady came out, and we visited with her and everything. But that not one time in that thing I remember being scared. I don't think I was scared not one time going through that. But then, I'll tell you another time, we were similar situation. We were riding down through, a matter of fact, I think it was that same night. We were going through this another community, and we came up in this little alleyway where the streets were real narrow. Matter of fact, this particular area of town, the streets are so narrow, it's a one-way street, and barely you can fit a car through there. I mean, it's narrow. Well, when I started going through it, it looked like a political rally was coming down through there with all the people surrounding the car. And the lady that was with me, she was familiar with the area, and she told me, she said, Pastor, just keep driving. Just keep driving. I can admit, I got a little scared right then. I didn't feel the need to get out and start witnessing to all those guys. You know what I mean? I felt like at that point it was time just to keep on moving. I was in the wrong place. The other case, I was fine. We talked to the lady, prayed with her. It was all good. I didn't feel scared at all. The fact is that, there is a time whenever you should just, invite the opportunity to suffer for Christ, but you shouldn't go out and saying, let me find the worst place I can go. Let me find a situation where I can bring suffering on myself. That's not what Peter's talking about, and I don't think that's what the Scripture teaches. We shouldn't want to go find suffering to bring it on ourselves. Again, we talked about it in the previous point, we should expect it. But when suffering does come, according to these Scriptures, that we ought to trust God through it. That no matter what. Notice in verse 19, he says, therefore, let those who suffer according to the will of God, again, it's according to the will of God. Where are you going? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? Is it according to the will of God? If you're in the will of God, and I think, Michael, you were pointing out to this, remember the disciples? I think it's in Mark. I believe it's in Mark. Let me see if I can find that real quick. It was disciples are being commissioned to go out, preach the gospel. Let me see. I want to read it to you, because this is always important to get this in context. This is not something I planned, obviously. It's not on a slide, but let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, here we go. Mark chapter 16, beginning in verse 15, and he said to them, this is him telling his disciples, giving a great commission, go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. He who believes and is baptized will be saved, but he who does not believe will be condemned. And these signs will follow those who believe. In my name they will cast out demons. They will speak with new tongues. They will take up serpents. If they drink anything deadly, it will by no means hurt them. They will lay hands on the sick, and they will recover. Now, some people take that scripture and don't take it literally, and I don't have a problem with you taking that literally. But if you want to take it literally, you got to understand, you can't say, okay, well, this is telling me these signs follow the kind of people that are identifying with Jesus and obey. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go find me some cyanide and I'm going to drink it. I'm going to go out here and I'm going to go out to the rattlesnake, the place that the man has got all the rattlesnakes, and I'm going to start wrapping all the rattlesnakes around my neck. No, that's not what it's talking about. Where this was really lived out, you read over in Acts chapter 27. I think it's Acts chapter 27. And you'll find Paul is shipwrecked on an island of Melita, right? He's shipwrecked on an island of Melita. He goes and he gets a bundle of sticks, and he goes to throw it on the fire. Now, why was he on the island of Melita? He was on the island of Melita because he was in a boat with a bunch of prisoners being shipped to go to Rome to face Caesar. All these prisoners were going to Rome, and Paul was going to go to Rome, and God had already told Paul, said, listen, I want you to go to Rome, and I want you to stand before Caesar, and I want you to tell him your story. Paul had been telling everybody his story, right? Told Agrippa, Told all those guys, all along the way, he told everybody his story, everybody he came in contact with since he had been arrested. This was on his final journey. Paul knows he's coming to the end of his life, right? He's on this boat, and he says, God tells Paul, Paul, stay on the boat, right? Stay on the boat. If everybody stays on the boat, you'll be safe. If you jump off the boat, boat's in a storm, right? Bad storm. The sailors are saying, we need to throw everything overboard. We need to all abandon ship. You know, the captain's saying abandon ship. Paul says, listen, God told me in a dream, if we all stay on the ship, we will live. If you get off the boat, you will die. Opposite of what the captain's saying, right? Paul says, no, I'm telling you, you need to stay on the ship. Everybody stays on the ship. Guess what happens? The ship, the crew tries their best to save it. They finally end up crashing into this little island. But guess what? All 300 souls lived. They all survived the shipwreck. They all get up on the island. You're wet. You're cold. What do you want to do? You want to get a fire so you can get your clothes warmed up, right? So they start up a fire. So Paul goes over and he gets a bundle of sticks. He goes and throws it on the fire. And when he throws the sticks, or as he was getting this bundle of sticks, throws it on the fire, a snake comes out and bites him on the hand. Paul shakes his hand like this. Snake falls off. And apparently the natives of that island looked, and apparently the snake was a highly venomous snake. The Bible calls it a viper. It was a highly venomous snake, and according to theologians, they believe it was one of these snakes native to that island, which basically kills you. If you get bitten by it, you're dead. There's no hope for you. It's like, one of the black mambas over there in India. It kills you within a few steps. It's just, you don't live from this. He shakes it off, and the Bible says, and felt no harm. And then everybody wanted to worship him. All the natives were like, well, oh, this guy must be a god. And then it gave him an opportunity to do what? To preach to them and tell them about the true God, the only one true God. That's how it worked out. Did Paul go looking for snakes? Let me see if I can find a snake. No. Matter of fact, he probably wouldn't have picked that up if he thought there was a snake in it, right? The snake was down in the wood. You can't see the snake. It's all bundled up in there in the wood. The snake gets in the fire. The snake says, I don't like being in the fire, right? Snake says, I'm coming out of here. So as he's putting it down, snake's coming out and says, who's put me in the fire? I don't like you. You put me in the fire, I'm biting you. And he bit him. I don't know if it actually went that way, but it sounds pretty good to me. He got bit, and then he shakes it off. Why? Because he was doing the will of God. Here's the point. When we're doing the will of God, when we're following the will of God, we may suffer. But God's going to take care of us, and ultimately He'll get the glory. And if somebody tries to poison us while we're trying to do the will of God, guess what? We'll feel no harm, right? Somebody serves you up a glass of Kool-Aid, and slips a little something in it. If you're doing the will of God, God will take care of you. And guess what? Even if you died, because like I said, not everybody lives, right? Not everybody has the stories like Paul. Shake off your hand and feel no harm, right? Think about the people in the modern days. Think about those guys like, who was it that went to the Vincas? I can't remember their names now. But they went over there, and the cannibals, the cannibals, and they had eaten them, and they ate the men, and then many years later, the wives of those men went back and ministered to those same villages and actually led them to the Lord. Now today, there's a church there because they came back. So you may get eaten, right? You may get consumed. That might happen. You might die. But even if you die, you bring glory to God. In other words, in your death, you will glorify God. Jesus died. Why? So He could glorify God. In His death, He could glorify God. So the point I'm making is, Peter's making, is that what we do is going to bring glory to God. So if you're suffering, we're not looking to suffer. We're not trying to, do stuff or cause the suffering to come upon us. But if we're suffering, we just need to learn to trust God. And God will take care of us through it. So suffering is good. And hopefully tonight you've learned that. We're going to go next week as we get into 2 Peter. We'll start noticing his transition from suffering as far as circumstances and our specific identification with Christ to preparing ourselves for those situations where there's false teaching. And today we have to protect ourselves against that because there's a lot of that. Even today is a lot of false teaching out there, and we need to guard ourselves against it and help our loved ones and those we care about, our families, to know the truth. And we're going to talk about that next week, okay? So let's go ahead and thank you again for those of you who joined us tonight online, and for all of you who joined us in person. Hopefully this has been a blessing to you. And hopefully if you missed a session, you can go back and see those other live streams and catch the other 3 lessons that we've had so far on 1 Peter. But hopefully you'll join us next week as we get into 2 Peter as well. Until the next time, may the Lord bless you and you and yours always.